first of all, I'd like to ask you, did anybody happen to see a video that I shared on YouTube or on social media a few days ago? It was from late last week, about my passion for Airbnb and sharing some inspiration about what VAs kind of do to change up their environment and to get that feeling of inspiration and productivity. Did anyone actually already see that video? Doesn't matter if you didn't, I'm just curious, so I'll know whether I'm repeating myself on some of those sentiments. Yes, Deborah saw it, Tony saw it, Rose didn't. Okay, Rose, it's on our either our VA Lifestyle Design Facebook page or YouTube channel, so you can check it out afterwards. But I want to share some things. This is kind of what's been inspiring this conversation. Hi, Edel from Northern Ireland, very late Sunday night. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Mattia, you'll be able to see that as well, that video afterwards. Thank you, Paulina. Paulina did see it. So just a brief recap. I was sharing kind of some excitement that I had that when I was a teenager, I had visualized being able to share a luxury apartment of someone that already owned one. And I won't go into the full story, you can watch the video afterwards. But it was funny because I stayed in an Airbnb apartment last week, and it was actually the first time that I'd stayed just in one bedroom of someone else's home. Usually we would book for the whole family, for Dan and I and the 3 kids. So we're booking out either a full apartment or a full house or what have you. But it was the first time where I'd actually been greeted by the host and welcomed into someone's home. And it was really cool because it reminded me about that crazy little dream I'd had, you know, when I was young, of like, oh, imagine if you just said, hey, could I stay in your room potentially? And now that actually eventuates with Airbnb, because we've got this ability to see who we're potentially connecting with beforehand, just like we can through our, you know, communities, through social media, through courses, etc. This community where more and more people are starting to connect on the ground now because of the evolution of it. So I was sharing about that, and it really, I felt so joyous in that situation. Like, it was so funny because it's such a little thing. It's like, what does it matter? A room with a bed and some internet, and I'm doing some work and going downstairs to eat. And it just really reminded me how much it really is those little things that create that day-to-day sense of fulfillment, that true sense of like, yes, I'm living life on my own terms. This is what I would be doing if I had 2 million cash sitting in the bank right now. I've, you know, so many times over the past 6 years, I've just had such a sense of gratitude and joy of the situation I was in right at that very moment, and had the thought to myself, you know, would I be doing anything differently if, you know, it's kind of, how do I put context to that? It's kind of like taking that old school mindset that a lot of us grew up with, the conditioning that it's either we're working, we're clocking into the 9 to 5, we're commuting, we're sacrificing, we're struggling, or we're millionaires and we're free and we're sitting on the beach and we're doing nothing, right? It's that dichotomy, like that conflict of like, it's either on or it's off. When you start to work online, when you get that flexibility, that time, that freedom, you realize that so many of these things that you're just hungering for, that you're just like, oh, I want that, I want that, I want that. They're not, sometimes they're from money, but quite often they're from the flexibility, the time and the mobility, you know, being able to connect with people, because you're not every 5 days a week in this one location. You can't, you know, get out and see people, what have you. And it also reminded me of, you know, the importance of having those moving toward visualizations, those bucket list items, those little moments of joy, to offset or even to take the focus off our don't wants. So what I mean by that, often when people are, you know, in that phase of either research or startup for their virtual assistant or freelance careers, there's a lot of don't want around the motivation. And I shared with you in an email about this event some of my don't wants, like don't want the kids in daycare, don't want to wake up to an alarm clock, don't want people telling me what to do at work, and you know, don't want this exhaustion of the daily commute, etc. And when we can get just a little bit of mental breathing space to move our visualizations, our bucket list items onto those moments of joy that mean something personally to us, it doesn't just feel good in the moment, it brings us results much faster. Results in the way of clients, in the way of income growth, in the way of refining our business to be working with clients that we really want to be working with. More of the opportunities to do those cool things, like in the video, you'll see me also share about someone who's studied the online biz skills, and she was saying she does house sits even locally to change up her environment, to have a pool, to have, you know, be around animals and all that type of thing. So, and there's one other little thing that I wanted to mention about that. Now, I've had to learn and relearn this lesson many, many times in my life, but the first, I guess, the pivotal moment when I first learned it about, not learned it theoretically, but felt it in to my core, was when I was 21. And I've actually written a blog post about this, so if anyone wants to check it out afterwards, but I'll share just briefly. I wrote a blog post on VA Lifestyle Design. It's back in the archives. It's called On Finding Your Patch of Paradise. And I talk about this sense of like oppression and frustration and being trapped that I felt when I first entered the corporate world after university. And there were some things that I learned around that time. The first thing that really opened me up to like moving away from this, don't like this, don't like this, don't like this, to visualizing and daydreaming and just having these little, you know, enjoyments of imagining what could actually be, was I stumbled into a bookstore in the Rocks in Sydney, where I had been working in a corporate office straight out of university. And the title of this book just jumped out at me, and it said, A Patch of Paradise, One Woman's Search for a Real Life in Bali. And I'd actually just been on vacation to Bali. This is a long time ago, for a few weeks with my mum. So that kind of is the first time I'd ever visited Bali. So that was kind of on my radar. And I was like, huh. And it said real life. And I was feeling this oppression in the corporate world. And it was so funny because I read that book, and that woman's profile was absolutely nothing like mine at the time. She was probably, you know, she had already been in the corporate world. She had 2 kids. She was married. You know, they'd had this frustration of family life, and then they had created something different for themselves. And me at the time, I was single. I was 21. I didn't have kids, but you know, it was like reading that, I was able to start daydreaming about this future vision. And she shared photos in the book, and she shared things like, you know, showing her husband and her working upstairs in this kind of like thatched roof loft in Bali. This was actually in the late 90s, I think. So she wasn't technically location independent because, well, everything was wired up in this thatched, you know, hut on the beach in Bali. But she would talk about things like working there while the kids were being cared for outside the little hut by local people. And her and the whole family would travel to Singapore to put on workshops there for the business that they were kind of building. And so I started to kind of like visualize this thing, this do want, this moving towards goal, these little daydreams about, you know, having the kids playing nearby while I was working, having, you know, I didn't have kids, but I was, you know, I realized that there was this opportunity to think about what I do want instead of just every day hitting that alarm clock and going, no, cannot do this. And that's where things started to really change for me. But of course, you know, life, sometimes you have to relearn things. And I also relearned it again, or Dan and I both relearned that when we were trying to get to Costa Rica. So I, you know, some years later, I can't remember exactly how many years later, 9 years later or so, found myself in that exact scenario, that Dan and I crossing each other, you know, him out at work all the time, me with the kids, trying to, you know, get everything done each day, get all the washing done on the weekend, etc. And rereading that book, relearning that lesson, and, you know, trying to save the money, it not working, and then realizing that we needed to find our happiness there first, and starting to do the day-to-day things right there in that environment where we started to go, okay, you know, okay, we're eating the food we want to eat, we're doing the things as a family we want to do, and just little by little moving into happiness first. And one of the pivotal moments that happened was the last few weeks before we actually left for Costa Rica from Australia, and we weren't sure whether we were going to be able to pull it off financially or not. And we were waiting on our car to sell, and we actually needed that to happen in order to feel comfortable going away for 6 months or what have you. And it wasn't selling. Sorry, we weren't even getting phone calls about it. It was listed on a big car sales website here in Australia. We weren't getting any phone calls. And there was this point where we were actually staying in a tent. If you haven't heard this story before, check out some of our old videos on YouTube. VA Lifestyle on YouTube. And we were staying in a tent these last few weeks, and we just kind of started meeting people, older people and younger people, backpackers and retirees from Europe, from the States, from Australia, doesn't matter where, and just them expressing, their joy for life. They've got this little camper van and they're cruising around Australia, or they're backpacking and they're picking fruit or what have you, and them saying, oh, this is great, you're doing it with kids, etc. And what happened is we had this kind of relaxation. So we let go of that, have to get to Costa Rica, have to get to Costa Rica, have to get to Costa Rica, have to escape, want out. And we settled into this like, wow, we've sold up, we've decluttered, we're free, we're on the road, we've got our car. If it doesn't sell, we could travel around Australia. Dan could get work up here. We've already made a change. We're already moving into our happiness, and we just accepted that there's so many possibilities here. And if day by day we're enjoying our life, then we've already achieved our goal. And what would you know, the next day we got a phone call about the car. The gentleman came over and met with Dan, loved the car. They organized the deal. It was practically done straight away, just with, the sign off or what have you. And we booked our tickets to Costa Rica. Incredible. It's happened. I mean, who has had an experience of this, of when they moved from the pushing against, don't want, into happiness, into acceptance, into joy in the moment, that then the thing that they were so badly, desperately wanting, whether that's a VA career or anything at all, came to pass almost immediately. Who has had an experience like that? I would love it if you just share a couple of lines about what happened for you, because I know that everyone, everyone has had these experiences, and what I find is that it's a matter of just reapplying those same reference points again and again and again. So Deborah says, absolutely, fantastic, great. Anyone else had an experience similar to that, in any small or big? And while I'm waiting for you to just type that in, I'll share one other quick little element here. Relearning this lesson. So, moving into happiness, understanding that we always have choice. Yes, being focused on our goals, but, realizing that the things that we're so desperately wanting to create, often we can create them by choice in this moment. Absolutely, having a flexible career makes a big change in the practicalities of that and being able to make those flexible choices. But there's so many things we can even do right in our present situation. Now, I wanted to share with you one other quick thing that happened for me just last week. So this is a really fresh one where I didn't necessarily have to learn the lesson the hard way, but I had to check in with myself to make sure that I was thinking about things clearly. Now, our 3-year-old son had an amazing experience in a beautiful kindergarten in Bali. He's a really social little character. He's not attached to Dan or I. He loves going out and making friends, as he calls it. Everywhere he goes, he says he made a friend. 2 of our children have that personality, and the middle one, not so much. He kind of likes to be with one of the siblings or with Dan and I, or what have you, just different personalities. But Sean, as a 3-year-old, he really would love that environment of being in those little kindergarten or, groups of little kids. And so I was walking past a daycare center in Australia. In my old life, I would have been like, no daycare center, no daycare center. But I was looking at it from a different perspective. I was like, wow, they got some cool little playground things in there, and Sean would probably love that. I'm just going to go in and see if he could come one day a week. And so I did that, and he went for 1 week, had a little incident where they tried to get him to put sunscreen on his face. He got horrible swollen eyes, and I had to come in and sign an incident report, etc. So the next week when I went in, I just asked some questions. This is the second week. Sean had a great time. He absolutely loved it. So I thought we were on to a winner. And what happened? So I went in, I just asked a couple of questions. I said, I know that it's your policy that you've got to put this particular sunscreen on. I know that he got some in his eyes last week. Does it need to be reapplied, or is just me putting it on in the morning enough? And they said, oh no, we need to reapply it every 2 hours. That's the policy, or what have you. And I said, oh, okay. Is that okay if I just go and buy my own sunscreen? I would go to the whole, health food shop and just get a chemical free one, or get a brand that I would like to use. Would you be happy to apply that if it's being applied so frequently? And they said, yes, absolutely. Just so long as you've gone to the doctor and get a label on it with his name to confirm that we can administer that to your child. And me, rebellious me had this instant feeling of like, oh no, I'm in Australia. I've lost my freedom. I'm oppressed. Like, just this, not a good feeling, right? And I knew that if I kept down that track, it would start to affect other things. It would start to affect our business. It would start to affect my joy hanging out with the kids, that type of thing. And so I had to check it pretty quick the same day. But at first it was like this real sense of feeling like, we're not in the right place. We should go. This is why we left, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So, and I mean, that's not the first instance of coming up against the, I don't know, what's a better word for it? The rules and regulations or what have you. That's happened a few times since we've been here, but I've had to remind myself that there's always this balance, right? These pros and cons, and we are proactively making choices about the experiences we want to create for ourselves and where we put our focus. And I realized that's not such an important thing. That's okay. I thought I was going to get this one benefit out of it, but the cost of that, the compromise for me was too great according to my own personal values. So I realized, okay, that's cool. This isn't these people's fault. This isn't the government's fault or what have you. I can just go and make a different decision. And so I went out and I said, could I get a cancellation form? And I cancelled it. It's great. When we go back to Bali, he can go have kindergarten there again. That's perfect. And the same thing happens, so many times I see people expressing, frustration with clients or what have you, that clients need to act a certain way. And once you start to realize that, well, no, they don't. But if they're acting that way, do I have the confidence to back myself to understand that, yes, I'm in control of my income. Yes, I know how to get another client. Or yes, I know how to communicate the boundaries here, even though that communication might be a little bit uncomfortable, to direct the client to work with me in the way that is on my terms, etc. So as we come up to these feelings where we feel like, oh, I'm pushing against, how can we make that choice inside, that choice to, that's our freedom, is our freedom to make the next choice, the next move. And that's also our happiness. And why is this so important? It's so important because that is how people get results. So I'll come back to the results, meaning growth, income growth, client growth, whatever is your next step in your business, wherever you're taking it. So where are we? So Deborah said, absolutely, it's human psychology. Bonnie said, yes, fantastic. Hi, Bonnie, good to see you. Agnes said, this is a big spiritual teaching. Let go of the control and the pushing against, and everything you want will align for you. You are so right. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's so true. And that's the thing that I like to think about is, that spiritual teaching, regardless of your beliefs, regardless of what you believe is the mechanics behind this, we've all had that experience of the accuracy of it. And so Deborah said, trying to persuade someone, but you can't force someone to do what you want. So you have to let go to the outcome, and then they start to listen. Yeah, that definitely is true as well in those types of, personal interaction situations. Mattia said, nothing specific comes to mind, but I'm sure it has happened. Now, I would like to find out share if you're happy to, it's completely voluntary. What are 2 of your virtually anywhere lifestyle bucket list items? Not your don't wants, not you want to quit my job, want to replace my income, etc., but those things that you happily daydream about doing day to day. Is it sitting in a beautiful restaurant and working, or doing something with your child, or being able to take your dogs to the beach on a weekday morning? Or is it, what is it for you? What is it that you're kind of dreaming about as that meaningful thing day by day by day that would start to make you feel like you can be present, like you can stop looking to the future? Rose said that she wants to live in Australia for 2 years. That's super cool. Rose, do you know which area of Australia you would like to do that in, or travel around? Carrie said sitting on a patio, sipping coffee before I meander to my computer to get something accomplished. That is so beautiful. Absolutely. It reminds me of something that I had in my dream book, and it was it was a picture of like a little table, like, you know, those small outdoor garden tables with two kind of cast iron chairs looking out to a garden in Bali with like orchids and beautiful green grass and palm trees. And I visualized myself just sitting there having a cup of tea, you know, and then there was a one of like I had a picture of like an outdoor shower. Again, it had purple orchids near it, and I was imagining, oh, okay, being hot and having this shower outdoors, which, you know, doing all those things in the tropics is incredible.